This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. This week, we're going to talk about a phrase that we all use and that we use too often at the wrong times and not always at the right times. And when there's something that we say over and over again in moments where it's really not warranted, it loses power for the times when it is truly warranted. And the phrase we're going to talk about today is, I'm sorry. Because I want to know how many times you apologize for things that really don't warrant an apology, or for things that you really didn't do. Or how many times you say, I'm sorry, when there's been absolutely no reason for it. And how has that become just a default response from you? And certainly this is something that men can do as well. I see it primarily in women because, my opinion, I believe that women are often conditioned to be pleasing and to be the ones to make themselves smaller in situations. And we could go on and on and on about that, but we're not going to do that today because we're going to talk about how to move forward from that and how to start to catch yourself when you begin to apologize for things that don't need an apology, and to look at the places where there may be an apology that's really warranted. What are the things for you to own and what are not yours to own? Because if you accidentally bump into somebody in the store, totally, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there, right? That's okay. There's an apology that's needed for that. But when we start to apologize for our very existence, when we start to apologize for having boundaries or having anything that remotely resembles a boundary, we leave ourselves open to taking on things that aren't ours. I had a friend that, in this world of text messaging, there's sort of this unspoken expectation that everything needs an immediate response, email, text message, phone calls, and we get in this very reactive cycle around that. And I had a friend who I had sent her a text message earlier in the day. It was nothing urgent. If it was urgent, I would have called, I would have left a voicemail, I would have indicated it was urgent. I forget what I was even asking for. And several hours later, when she responded, she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I've been in a meeting." And I said, don't ever apologize for not responding immediately. And how many times do we do that? Oh, I'm so sorry. I was busy. I was in the middle of something. Well, that's okay, because you're allowed to be in the middle of something and you're allowed to be in the meeting. And that's not a place where an apology is warranted, because it actually implies that somehow my needs were more important than hers, or that my time was more important than hers. And we want to bring awareness to that, and bring awareness to the times that you're just saying, I'm sorry, out of habitual patterns, right? Because that's just become your default of saying, I'm sorry. And I wrote a blog some time ago, actually about this time last year, about, I had taken, my kitty passed away last year, and he, you know how these animals are, he was family. And I was in the vet with him toward the end of his life, and the vet tech came up to me and started to talk to me, and I opened my mouth to respond, and what came out, and you know how that happens, is when the wave is coming and you feel it and you can't stop it, and what came out was a wave of emotion and a lot of tears. Oh gosh, so many tears. And it was one of those moments where I couldn't talk for a minute because I was so overwhelmed by the emotion. And the first thing I said was, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And in that moment, because of the work that I've done and because of the awareness that I've been bringing to the things that we do on an unconscious level that we don't realize, I caught myself and I said, I'm actually not sorry. I am completely overwhelmed by emotion right now. And this is an appropriate response to losing something that you love, is having a wave of feeling come up. And from that, it made me so much more conscious of the times that we apologize for things that we really don't need to apologize for. And in some way, when we do it, we're literally making ourselves small. Now, I want to put the caveat here when it comes to emotion and things like this. We're always talking, all the examples I use, I'm talking about coming from a healthy place. I'm not talking about if you like completely lose your shit at your spouse or your partner and you're screaming and yelling and throwing a fit. Well, that's very different, right? That's not showing emotion. That's you've lost your grip. And it happens sometimes, but that's certainly a place where an apology would be warranted. Hey, I'm sorry I let it get to that point. That couldn't have felt good for you. I digress. So my point being is to bring awareness to those places where we start to apologize for things that really we don't need to be apologizing for. Or we get into this habit of over apologizing if there is an apology that's warranted. I had a dear client who I have worked with for years, and the other day she missed one of our appointments. She missed our call. And she's never done this in 2 years. She's been 2 minutes early to every single coaching call we've ever had. So it's certainly not a pattern. It was an incident. And she missed our call. And so I just sent her an email. I said, hey, just want to make sure everything's okay. Do you want to reschedule? And when she did respond, she said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. She has a new baby. My aunt stopped by to see the baby. I completely spaced it. No problem. I know you've got to charge me for a session. It's, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I want to reschedule. And yes, as a business owner, of course you need to have policies in place, but let's be real. That is to cover yourself when you have someone that has a habitual pattern, right? And I said, listen, I'm not going to charge you for this session. These things happen. You've never done this before. Like, free pass, right? Totally fine. I'm not worried about it. Not a big deal. And bless her heart, she wrote me back again and said, I'm so sorry, and kept apologizing. And I just feel so bad. And, and I finally told her, I said, hey, your life coach orders you to stop apologizing, because she had said, I'm sorry once. Which is totally appropriate. I'm sorry. I totally spaced this. I apologize for the inconvenience. End of story, right? That's all that's warranted. And when we get into that cycle of over apologizing and over apologizing and over apologizing, it actually puts us in a really disempowered place, because what it's doing is it's keeping us in this cycle of really what it is it's getting into it ties into that worthiness piece of it, of almost like I've done something so egregious and I just feel so horrible. And we extrapolate that out to mean all these things that it doesn't actually mean. And those are the things that we want to just bring awareness. If this is something that you see yourself do, or you catch yourself in patterns of over apologizing again and again and again, just be aware of it. Because, in this situation, like I said, I knew this was not a client that does this habitually. I knew it was a one-off thing, right? Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has missed an appointment once in their life. And heaven forbid, we hope the person on the other end has the grace to understand it's not something we're doing on purpose, right? And so she'd apologized to me once. And I said, no problem. We're totally fine, right? Apology accepted. But then when we continue to do it, it's because on some level it's tapping into that people pleasing. It's tapping into, I did this, and the meaning of it is that, I'm thoughtless, or I don't put importance on other people, or I don't pay attention to my calendar, or, whatever meaning it is that we extrapolate that out to be. And it puts us in a very disempowered place. And when we have that cycle and that pattern, we really want to bring awareness to it and just catch ourselves. Because what will happen is that we will start to apologize for things where no apology is warranted. And when we do that, we are truly making ourselves smaller. And there were several things that happened that really brought this to my awareness again, that this is something that we feel is an impulse. Because I was in a situation this week that I'm not ready to talk about yet, but I will talk about, where someone in my life was horribly mistaken about something, and truly horribly mistaken about something. And I caught myself on the verge of saying, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that. I'm sorry if I didn't make that more clear. But I stopped myself before those words came out of my mouth, because the truth of the situation was that I was very clear. I could not have been more clear. And I did my part to draw my boundary. I did my part to say my truth about the situation. This other person was mistaken for whatever reason. The message didn't seem to go in. And that was not a situation where I needed to apologize. Because in that situation, if I had said what was on the tip of my tongue, which was, I'm sorry that I didn't make this more clear, it would have diminished me. And it would have diminished me as a woman, and it would have diminished me as a human being, because I was clear in my message. I was very crystal clear in my message. And it was not my responsibility, it was not my fault that this other person did not hear, did not process, did not understand that. I really want to challenge you to take a look at this in your life, and to take a look at the places where you may be just unconsciously apologizing for things that you don't need to apologize for. And you bring awareness to it by noticing the pattern, by noticing when you say it, and sort of doing a post-game wrap-up, right, of what was it that I was really apologizing for? Was this a situation where where there was something that I was sorry for? Because as I said earlier, when we use a phrase like that habitually, and we use it at times when it's really not warranted, it takes the power out of it when we really are sorry. Because if we're apologizing all day, every day for things that aren't our responsibility, then when the time comes for us to truly take ownership of something where we have made a mistake or we have done something that warrants an apology, it doesn't have the same power, right? It's like if you say this word all day, every day, you say this phrase all day, every day, it takes the power away from it. So let's save our apologies for the times when we really need to apologize for something, when we really need to say, hey, I'm sorry. I handled that poorly. I handled that situation poorly. I should have thought more before I did this, or I should, whatever it is, really taking ownership when there is truly a need to apologize, and not taking on things where an apology isn't warranted. You never need to apologize for drawing a boundary around your time. You never, ever need to apologize for drawing a boundary around your body. You never, ever need to apologize for taking care of yourself and doing what is right for you. These are things that don't need an apology. And when we are in that pattern of feeling this need to apologize and to say I'm sorry for things that aren't ours, we are putting ourselves in a disempowered place. We are fundamentally saying I matter less than everyone else. And when we're there, we leave ourselves vulnerable to other people who are maybe not as healthy as we would like them to be. And by that I mean maybe they are used to putting their crap on somebody else. Maybe they are used to making someone else responsible for what is really only theirs to own. This also segues into something that I feel very strongly about. Obviously, there are a lot of things I feel strongly about, or I wouldn't have a podcast to begin with. But I feel very strongly about this idea of self-responsibility, because really that's what a lot of this comes down to, is that all of us have a responsibility to come from a healthy place within us, to come from a place that is in alignment with what is really true and right for us. We have a responsibility to tune into our intuition to tune into our body when our body is telling us that something is right or wrong. And we have a responsibility when we're interacting with other people to do so from a place of grace and compassion, with the caveat that we must first always respect ourselves and our own boundaries in a healthy way. And what I mean by that is that you are not meant to make yourself small to make someone else comfortable. That doesn't mean that you go, fuck you, I'm doing what I want to do, I don't care how you feel about it, or you just have absolutely no thought about anything that you do. But what that means is that you honor your own boundaries, you honor what is right for you, and you don't take on things that are not yours to take on. You don't take on the responsibility for anyone else's reactions. Your responsibility, if you're delivering a message or if you're saying something that you think someone is not going to want to hear or enjoy hearing, your only responsibility is to do so from a place of as much compassion as possible. One thing that I hear a lot of people say, especially around romantic relationships or relationships where maybe there's something that they've been holding back from saying, or a truth about their life or themselves or the nature of the relationship that they've been holding back, I hear people say, I don't want to hurt her or him. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to cause them pain. Well, unless you're a psychopath, of course you don't want to cause other people pain. However, if there's something that you know to be true for you that you're not sharing because you fear it's going to hurt them, then you're absorbing things within yourself that are not true for you. So, let's take the example of if there is a romantic relationship that you know is no longer working in your life and you've been avoiding dealing with it because you come to, I don't want to hurt them. Guess what? That's a situation where you're not doing them any favors because you're no longer invested in the relationship, and you're not doing yourself any favors either because you know that what's true for you is that this person isn't right for you, and you're keeping both of you in this dynamic. So the responsibility that you have in this situation is to deliver that message with as much compassion and caring as you would want someone to do with you. And that might look like telling them, I've so enjoyed our time together and you do mean a lot to me. This relationship just doesn't fit anymore. And they're probably not going to be excited about hearing that, or maybe they've known it all along. But the point is, you are not responsible for how they respond to that. You are responsible for speaking what is true for you in a compassionate way. And it is not your responsibility to apologize in that situation or in any situation when you're sharing something that you really feel to be true. And this is not, again, I want to say this really clearly because this is not about entitlement. This is not about this sort of blind way that some people crash through life and say, oh, I'm speaking my truth. You're not speaking your truth. You're being an unbridled asshole. Knock it off. This is about what is really true for you. Honor what's true for you. Honor what you know to be right for you. If that's a boundary around your time, if it's a truth about a relationship, if it's a truth about an energy in your life that you just doesn't feel good for you anymore, that's what's true for you. And your responsibility is to draw that boundary, to draw it in a compassionate way, and then to hold that line and not to apologize for how you feel, not to apologize for saying that you can't make it to an event because it doesn't feel, maybe you don't feel well, you feel very drained. Not to apologize for not responding immediately to a text message that doesn't need an immediate response. Not over apologizing when you've already made an apology for something. The most powerful thing you can do when there is an apology that's needed, maybe you made a mistake at work, maybe you missed an appointment, is to apologize once from a very grounded and wholehearted, authentic way of taking ownership of that. Like I said, if you missed the appointment, you do exactly what my client did the first time, which was, I am so sorry. I am so sorry that I disrespected your time. I had something come up and I totally spaced it. I apologize. End of story, right? End of story. Or if you're in a situation with a partner or a friend or anyone in your life where maybe an action that you've taken really did cause them a lot of pain. And you can say, I'm sorry that I handled it that way. Can you tell me how that felt for you? Help me understand. I apologize that my actions, that I was thoughtless, that maybe you said something that you could have said better, or that you came from a place that wasn't really in alignment, and you own what's yours to own. And then you give that heartfelt apology, because when we aren't throwing around I'm sorry so cheaply, the phrase has more power, and it has the power that it should have. And what this really boils down to is one of my very favorite phrases, which was rather revolutionary for me when I really truly started to understand what it meant. And that phrase is, own your shit. And the extension to that is, but don't own shit that isn't yours. Own your shit, but don't own shit that isn't yours. And that means that you are responsible for yourself. You're responsible for apologizing, heartfelt apology when it is warranted, and not taking on that which is not yours. Not apologizing for things that don't need an apology, and for saving that I'm sorry for a situation where you genuinely, deeply need to own and take ownership of something that you have actually done. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.